The smell of undiluted bleach sliced through the freezing winter air like a chemical blade. It wasn't the cold that made the young maid scream. It was the sensation of her skin beginning to dissolve. Min Pyo, the matriarch of the Kwan crime family, didn't even blink. She simply pointed a manicured, diamond-clad finger at the girl's blistering knuckles. "I see a callus," she whispered, her voice soft but heavy with threat. "That is filth. Weakness. Scrub the stone until the callus is gone. Scrub until you bleed purity." No one in the line of 12 servants moved. No one dared to exhale. They stood like statues in the snow. 3 spots down, Brenda Ade dug her fingernails into her palms. She wasn't just a maid. She was a registered nurse. Her medical training screamed at her to rush forward, but she forced herself to recite the anatomy of the hand in her mind just to stay calm. Phalanges. Metacarpals. Carpal tunnel. She had to stay invisible. Because getting fired didn't just mean losing a paycheck. It meant her brother back in Nigeria wouldn't get his heart surgery. It meant he would die. The next morning, the smell of bleach still lingered in Brenda's nose as she navigated the endless corridors of the Kwan estate. She had left Ogun State and her medical career behind, blacklisted by corruption, only to land in a golden cage in Seoul. They treated her like she was invisible, a tool to be used and discarded, but they didn't know who they had hired. While the other staff saw Lee Min Pyo as a terrifying monster, Brenda's clinical eye saw something else. She saw the slight limp he tried to hide. She saw the pinpoint pupils of opioid dependence. She saw a patient in agony. And in a house built on silence and pain, a nurse who knows how to heal is the most dangerous person of all. The squeak of the rag against the mahogany banister was the only sound allowed in the penthouse. Brenda scrubbed until her reflection stared back, distorted and weary. She had been at the Kwan estate for 3 days, and the silence was heavier than the winter air outside. Then came the footsteps, uneven, dragging. The other maids scattered like roaches when the lights flicked on, terrified of the ghost king. But Brenda slowed her movements, watching from the corner of her eye. Lee Min Pyo walked into the grand foyer not like a predator, but like a man wading through invisible water. To the untrained eye, he was stoic, his face a mask of cold indifference fitting for the most feared man in Seoul. To a nurse who had spent 5 years in the trauma ward of a Lagos teaching hospital, he was a billboard of pathology. His left shoulder sat an inch lower than his right, favoring an old injury. His skin had the clammy, gray sheen of diaphoresis, and his eyes dark, intense, and pinned to the size of needle points. Opioids, she diagnosed instantly. High dose. Stand up straight. A voice cut through the silence. Min Pyo descended the stairs, her silk hanbok rustling like dry leaves. She didn't look at her son with concern. She looked at him with disdain. Lee flinched, a microscopic spasm along his jawline, and forced his spine straight, though Brenda saw the white-knuckle grip he kept on the railing. "The Kims are arriving in an hour," the matriarch said, stopping inches from him. She reached into her sleeve and produced a small, unlabeled orange bottle. She didn't hand it to him. She shook 2 pills into her own palm and held them to his lips like he was a sick child. "Swallow. You look pathetic when you grimace." Lee obeyed, the resignation in his posture heartbreaking. Brenda recognized the shape of the pills. Oxycodone. Maybe stronger. Enough to kill the pain, but enough to dull the mind, to keep the wolf on a leash. Min Pyo wasn't treating a patient. She was sedating a weapon. As the mother glided away, leaving her son swaying slightly in the drafty hall, Brenda felt that dangerous itch in her fingers again, the urge to heal what was being broken on purpose. She gripped her rag tighter, reminding herself of the surgery fees, the brother waiting in Nigeria, and the cost of interference. Lee Min Pyo wasn't a king. He was a patient in a penthouse prison. 2 weeks into her tenure, a typhoon-battered soul, the rain lashing against the reinforced glass of the estate like shrapnel. Brenda lay awake in the servants' quarters, her nurse's intuition pricking at her skin, unable to settle. The house groaned under the wind, masking the sound of the front door forcing open, but nothing could mask the heavy, wet thud that followed, nor the jagged, desperate gasp for air. She didn't hesitate. Pulling her robe tight, she stepped into the corridor. The Ghost King, Lee Min Pyo, was slumped against the silk wallpaper, trailing a smear of dark, viscous blood. He wasn't the terrifying mob boss in that moment. He was a body in hypovolemic shock. Brenda rushed to him, her knees hitting the marble floor hard. The smell hit her instantly, not just the metallic tang of fresh blood, but the sickly sweet, rotting odor of an untreated infection. "Get away," Lee rasped, his hand fumbling uselessly for the handgun holstered at his hip. His skin was gray, clammy with a fever sweat. Brenda slapped his hand away from the weapon. She peeled back his jacket. The wound was a jagged slice across his oblique, likely from a knife, but it was days old. The edges were angry red and necrotic, weeping pus mixed with fresh arterial flow. "You're septic," she stated, her voice stripping away the submissive whisper of a maid. "Your blood pressure is crashing. If you don't let me help you, you will be dead before the storm ends." He blinked, the fog of pain momentarily clearing at her authoritative tone. Before he could argue, she hooked her arm under his shoulder. "Up. Now." Adrenaline surging, she dragged his dead weight into the nearest bathroom, the harsh fluorescent lights exposing the grim reality of his condition. She kicked the door shut. "I need a suture kit," she barked at the empty air, then realized she was alone. She raided the cabinet, finding a basic travel sewing kit and a bottle of high-proof vodka from the adjacent minibar. "This is going to burn." She poured the alcohol directly into the gaping wound. Lee arched his back, a guttural animalistic sound tearing from his throat as his eyes rolled back. Brenda didn't apologize. There was no room for pity in triage. With hands steady as stone, she sterilized a needle. She began to debride the wound, scraping away the dead tissue before piercing his skin. An out tie. The rhythm was muscle memory. Blood soaked the knees of her uniform, staining the white fabric crimson, but she worked with relentless precision. 10 stitches later, the bleeding stopped. Lee lay panting on the cold tile, his chest heaving. He turned his head, his dark, pain-filled eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of confusion and awe. He reached out, his bloody fingers gripping her wrist. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Brenda wiped the sweat from her forehead, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. "I'm the woman who just saved your life." The promotion was announced with a single, curt memorandum posted in the kitchen. Brenda Ade was now the master's personal attendant. To the rest of the staff, it was a scandal, a break in the rigid hierarchy that sparked jealous whispers in the laundry room. To Brenda, it was a tactical necessity. The penthouse suite became her operating theater, and the Ghost King became her patient. Inside the heavy oak doors, the dynamic shifted instantly. The moment the lock clicked shut, Brenda dropped the facade of the submissive servant. She moved with the efficiency of a head nurse during rounds. Lee Min-pyo sat on the edge of his bed, shirtless, the morning light tracing the contours of his tattoos and the fresh, angry line of stitches across his abdomen. "Granulation tissue is forming," Brenda murmured, her cool fingers inspecting the wound site. She applied a fresh dressing, her touch firm but gentle. "No signs of secondary infection. You're lucky." Lee watched her, his expression unreadable, though the tension in his shoulders had lessened since the night on the bathroom floor. He didn't flinch when she worked. He had stopped treating her like a piece of furniture, and started watching her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then came the knock. A junior maid left a silver tray outside the door. On it sat a glass of water and the inevitable, unlabeled orange bottle from Sherman Pyo. Lee's hand twitched, a reflex born of chemical dependence. He reached for the bottle, his eyes darkening with a mixture of need and resentment. Brenda's hand got there first. She snatched the bottle, unscrewing the cap. "Give it to me," Lee growled, a flash of the dangerous mob boss surfacing through the pain. "You don't understand the dosage." "I understand that 80 milligrams of oxycodone every 4 hours isn't pain management. It's a chemical leash," Brenda countered calmly. She walked to the heavy desk and pulled out a small paring knife. She took 2 pills, cut them in half, and swept the rest back into the bottle, which she pocketed. She held out the reduced dose. "We are tapering you off. Starting today. My mother will know if I'm not compliant. Your mother wants a puppet. I am trying to give you back your legs." She placed the halved pills in his palm, her dark eyes locking onto his. "Trust the nurse, Master Lee. The pain means your nerves are waking up. It means you're alive." He stared at the white fragments in his hand. His body was screaming for the full dose, the familiar fog that made living in this house bearable. Sweat beaded on his upper lip, the early onset of withdrawal. But he looked at Brenda, standing tall in her uniform, the only person in the mansion who had ever dared to tell him no for his own good. Slowly, Lee swallowed the reduced dose. He lay back against the pillows, closing his eyes as the tremors started, surrendering control not to the drugs but to her. The industrial kitchen of the Kwan estate was a sterile laboratory of chrome and silence, governed by Shermin Pyo's strict dietary regime. Brenda invaded it like a tactical force. The staff watched in horrified fascination as she bypassed the unseasoned rice porridge intended for the master. Today, the patient required something stronger than starch. He needed the fire of Ogun state. She had leveraged her newfound authority to procure the specific ingredients: fresh goat meat, onions, scent leaves, and a lethal handful of red chili peppers that made the head chef cough just looking at them. She pounded the spices with a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of her homeland. The aroma that soon filled the air was aggressive. It was a thick, complex cloud of heat and earth that climbed the ventilation shafts, invading the cold sterility of the mansion. It smelled of life, of sweat, of survival. It was a direct insult to the bland perfection the mother demanded. Brenda poured the dark, steaming broth into a bowl, the spicy steam kissing her face, reminding her of her grandmother's kitchen in Abeokuta, where sickness was always fought with sweat and spice. When she entered the penthouse, the air was heavy with the sour smell of detox. Lee Min Pyo was curled in the armchair by the window, wrapped in a silk duvet, shaking. The withdrawal was at its peak. His bones felt like glass, his skin crawled, and the gray world offered no comfort. He looked up as the intense steam from the bowl hit him, his nose twitching. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice cracking from disuse. "The smell. It's violent." "Porridge is for invalids," Brenda stated, placing the tray on his lap with professional firmness. "This is pepper soup. In my home we don't treat weakness with blandness. We burn it out. This is for a warrior trying to remember how to fight." The broth was dark, oily, and menacing. Lee's hand trembled as he lifted the spoon. The first mouthful hit him like a physical blow. The heat seared his tongue, scorched his throat, and landed in his empty stomach like a flare. He gasped, eyes widening, tears springing instantly to the corners. "Too much?" Brenda asked, leaning in, her face close to his, scanning for signs of distress. "No," he choked out, the burn chasing away the phantom itch of the opioids. "Give me more." He ate with a desperation that frightened him. The capsaicin flooded his system, triggering natural endorphins that rushed to meet the pain. Sweat broke out on his brow, not the cold, clammy sheen of withdrawal, but the honest, feverish heat of the soup. His nose ran. His pulse quickened. For the first time in a decade, he didn't feel numb or agonizingly raw. He just felt hot. The knot of ice in his stomach, placed there by his mother's cold pills and colder love, began to melt under the assault of the African spices. He scraped the bottom of the bowl, breathing hard, the spices lingering on his lips. He looked at Brenda. She wasn't just a nurse or a maid in that moment. She was an alchemist who had turned peppers into salvation. "It burns," he said, pressing a hand to his chest where a new, unfamiliar warmth was spreading. "Good," she smiled, a genuine, dazzling expression that disarmed him completely. "That means your heart is finally thawing out." The clarity in Lee Min Pyo's eyes was the first warning sign. For years, his gaze had been a muddy pool of sedation, but after a week of Brenda's intervention, the fog was lifting. He sat at the breakfast table, spine straight, reading a financial report without his hands trembling. To a mother, this should have been a miracle. To Shermin Pyo, it was an insurrection. She watched him from the head of the table, her teacup suspended in midair, calculating the threat level. The nurse wasn't just healing his body. She was severing the strings. The retaliation was swift and bureaucratic. The next morning, the estate was eerily quiet. The laundry staff, the junior maids, and the kitchen assistants were gone. "Security concerns," Shermin Pyo announced smoothly, intercepting Brenda in the hallway. "I have dismissed the others. Until new staff are vetted, the household duties fall to you. You wanted to be indispensable, didn't you?" It wasn't a request, it was a siege. Brenda's role expanded from private nurse to sole housekeeper of a 20-room mansion. Her shift began at 4 a.m. and didn't end until midnight. The mother turned the estate into a gauntlet, creating messes that required immediate attention while Brenda was trying to change Lee's dressings. A vase accidentally knocked over in the west wing. Mud tracked onto the pristine foyer marble. Silverware that needed polishing immediately before dinner. Brenda moved through the house like a ghost, her body screaming with exhaustion. Her feet swelled in her shoes, and the lack of sleep made the edges of her vision blur. She recognized the symptoms in herself: sleep deprivation psychosis, hypoglycemia, physical burnout, but she couldn't stop. Sherman Pyo was always watching, hovering like a carrion bird, waiting for the single error that would justify termination. A missed spot of dust. A wrinkled sheet. A medication delivered 1 minute late. "You look tired," Sherman Pyo whispered one evening, finding Brenda scrubbing the grand staircase at 2 a.m. The older woman stood above her, pristine and rested. "Perhaps this job is too much for you? If you leave now, I won't mark your record." Brenda looked up, sweat stinging her eyes. Her hands were raw, her back locked in a spasm of pain. She thought of her brother's heart monitor in Lagos, the steady beep that cost thousands of dollars a day to maintain. "I am fine, madam," Brenda said, dipping her rag into the bucket. Her voice was steady, forged in the chaotic emergency rooms of Nigeria, where fatigue was a constant companion. Sherman Pyo's eyes narrowed. She kicked the bucket, sending soapy water sloshing onto the just cleaned step. "You missed a spot," she said coldly, turning on her heel. "Clean it again. And don't wake my son." Brenda stared at the water pooling on the marble. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply wrung out the rag and started scrubbing, knowing that the only way to win this war was to refuse to break. The vibration of the phone against her chest felt like a defibrillator shock. It was 3:17 a.m. Brenda was folding linens in the basement, her eyes gritty with fatigue, when the screen lit up with the country code plus 234. Lagos. Dr. Okone. She scrambled into the narrow supply closet, pressing the phone to her ear, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the device. "Doctor? Is he okay?" The silence on the other end was heavy, static-filled, and terrifying. "Brenda, I'm sorry. Ideally, we would wait for the full funds, but Tund went into cardiac arrest an hour ago. We revived him, but his valve is collapsing. We need to operate immediately. The hospital board won't release the theater without the remaining payment." The concrete floor seemed to dissolve beneath her feet. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking into a desperate plea. "I have half. I just need another week. Please don't let him die." "I can't hold them off, Brenda. You have 2 hours. If the funds aren't cleared, they move to the next patient on the list." The line clicked dead. The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the floor. Brenda slid down the wall, burying her face in her knees. The stoic nurse, the fierce protector, the woman who had stared down a Mafia matriarch without blinking. She shattered. Sobs tore through her chest, raw and ugly, echoing in the cramped space. She had endured the bleach, the exhaustion, and the humiliation, and it wasn't enough. Tun was going to die while she was halfway across the world, polishing silver for criminals. "Who is he?" The deep voice made her jump. Lee Min Pyo stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. He wasn't wearing his suit armor, dressed only in sweatpants and a t-shirt. He looked startlingly human. He had heard everything. Brenda tried to wipe her face, shame burning her cheeks. "Master Lee, I apologize. I will return to work." "Stop." He stepped into the closet, the small space suddenly crowded with his presence. He didn't look angry. He looked intense, his dark eyes searching hers. "Who is dying?" "The man on the phone." "My brother," she choked out, the truth spilling over before she could stop it. "He needs heart surgery. That's why I'm here. That's why I take your mother's abuse. I need the money to save him." Lee stared at her. For weeks his mother had whispered that Brenda was a spy, a gold digger, a rat sent to infiltrate the empire. But looking at the woman huddled on the floor, stripped of her defenses, he saw only terrified love. She wasn't stealing from him. She was sacrificing herself for someone else. It was a purity of loyalty he had never known in his own bloodline. "Give me the account number," he ordered softly. "What?" "The hospital. Give me the number." He pulled out his own phone. Trembling, Brenda recited the banking details. Lee tapped the screen, his face illuminated by the cool blue light. He paused for a second, verified the Swift code and hit send. It's done, he said, turning the screen to face her. The transfer confirmation showed an amount that wasn't just the balance. It was triple the cost, enough for the surgery and the best post-op care in Lagos. Call them back. Tell them to operate. Brenda stared at the screen, unable to breathe, her tears stopping in sheer shock. Why? Because you saved my life, Lee said, offering her a hand to pull her up from the floor. And unlike my family, I pay my debts. The sanctuary of the servants' quarters was violated at dawn. Brenda woke not to her alarm, but to the sound of her mattress being overturned. She scrambled back against the cold wall, heart hammering, as two security guards tore through her meager possessions. Standing in the doorway like an executioner was Shermin Pyo. Search everything, the matriarch commanded, her voice devoid of warmth. I will not have an addict living under my roof. Took less than a minute. One of the guards reached under the loose floorboard beneath her bed, a spot Brenda didn't even know existed, and pulled out a heavy plastic bag. Inside were 3 vials of clear liquid and a familiar, unlabeled orange pill bottle. Fentanyl, Shermin Pyo announced, holding the bag up to the light like a trophy. And my son's missing oxycodone. I suspected you were a thief, Brenda. I didn't realize you were also a junkie. She sneered, tossing the bag at Brenda's feet. You've been stealing from the family supply. Getting high while pretending to care for my son. The police are already on their way. I did not put that there, Brenda said, her voice shaking with the sheer injustice of it. I am a nurse. I know better than to mix those. I have never touched. Silence. Shermin Pyo snapped. Your brother's surgery won't matter when you are rotting in a Korean prison. She won't be going to prison. The voice cut through the tension like a blade. Lee Min Pyo stood in the corridor. He was fully dressed in a charcoal suit, his posture rigid, his eyes clear and sharp, a stark contrast to the glazed, pliable man his mother was used to manipulating. He walked into the cramped room, the air seemingly bending around his authority. Look at her, Min Pyo, his mother said, her tone shifting to feigned concern. She's a common addict. She's been siphoning your medication. That's why you've been in pain. She's been taking your relief for herself. Lee bent down and picked up the bag. He didn't look at Brenda. He looked at the evidence. He turned the vials over in his hand, his mind working with a speed and precision that had been absent for years. The fog was gone, and in its place was the cold intellect that ran an empire. Fentanyl citrate, Lee read, examining the label. Hospital grade. Unbroken foil seals. He looked up, locking eyes with his mother. Brenda has been weaning me off opioids for weeks. She cuts my pills. She counts them. If she wanted drugs, she had access to the open supply on my nightstand every single day. Why hide sealed vials she hasn't used? She is a master manipulator. His mother hissed, her composure cracking. She is saving them to sell. These vials have the batch number from the shipment that arrived yesterday, Lee said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. A shipment that was delivered directly to your private safe, mother. Only 2 people have the biometric key. Me and you. The silence that followed was suffocating. The guard shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden shift in gravity. Shermin Pyo's mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine fear. She had played her hand assuming her son was still blinded by addiction. She hadn't realized that by trying to destroy the nurse, she had awakened the king. Lee tossed the bag to the head guard. Dispose of this. And if anyone enters this room again without my direct written permission, they will answer to me. He turned to Brenda, his gaze softening just enough to convey an apology. Get dressed. We have work to do. The Lunar New Year banquet was a spectacle of crimson silk and gold leaf, designed to project the Kwan family's unshakable power to the underworld's elite. But to Brenda, standing in the periphery in her starch-stiff uniform, the air tasted of copper and betrayal. Shermin Pyo sat at the head table, radiating a brittle, dangerous elegance. She gestured for the servers to leave, pouring a dark, viscous herbal brew from a distinct celadone pot herself. A traditional tonic, the matriarch announced, her voice carrying over the hushed murmurs of the lieutenants. To restore your chi, my son. To heal the rift between us. Lee accepted the delicate porcelain cup. He looked at his mother, searching for a trace of the woman who had raised him, and drank. The silence in the room was absolute as he swallowed. 10 minutes later, the Ghost King gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. He blinked rapidly, rubbing his eyes as if trying to clear a smudge from a lens. "The lights," he muttered, his voice thick and slurring slightly. "Why are they yellow?" Brenda froze. Her mind raced through the toxicology textbook she hadn't opened in years. Yellow halos. Xanthopsia. She scanned him. He was sweating, a cold, clammy sheen on his forehead, and his hand was clawing absent-mindedly at his sternum. Nausea. Visual disturbances. Bradycardia. It wasn't a tonic. It was digitalis purpurea. Foxglove. A cardiac glycoside that, in an overdose, would slow the heart until it simply stopped beating. As Lee lifted the cup for a second, fatal sip, Brenda broke every rule of the house. She sprinted across the hall, the sound of her heels striking the marble like gunshots. "Don't drink it." She didn't ask, she struck. Her hand connected with the cup, sending it flying from his grip. Porcelain shattered against the wall, spraying the dark liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. "You dare!" Sherman Pyo shrieked, leaping to her feet. "Guards! Kill this madwoman! Check his pulse!" Brenda screamed at the confused lieutenants, dropping to her knees beside Lee. She jammed her fingers against his carotid artery. It was terrifyingly slow. Thready. Skipping beats. "He's in third-degree heart block." She didn't give him herbs. She dosed him with digitalis. "Look at his eyes. He sees halos. She is stopping his heart." Lee slumped against Brenda, gasping for air, his vision swimming in toxic green and yellow. "Mother," he rasped. "He is hallucinating," Sherman Pyo spat, though her hands shook violently. "She is poisoning his mind. Remove her. Test the tea," Brenda challenged, her voice ringing with the ferocity of a protector. She shielded Lee with her own body, staring down the armed guards. "If it's harmless, madam, drink it yourself." The room went deathly silent. The lieutenants, the guards, and the elders all turned to the matriarch. Sherman Pyo stared at the puddle of dark liquid on the table. She didn't move toward the spill. She didn't defend herself. She simply stood there, frozen by her own malice. In her hesitation, the truth roared louder than any confession. Lee looked up at Brenda, his heart faltering in his chest, realizing that the woman holding him was the only thing keeping him alive, while the woman who gave him life had just tried to end it. The excision of a malignant tumor is rarely clean, but it is always necessary for the host to survive. Sherman Pyo did not scream when the guards escorted her to the waiting sedan. She maintained her icy composure until the very end, refusing to look at the son she had tried to kill. Lee stood on the balcony, watching the taillights fade into the Seoul night, his expression unreadable. For the first time in his life, the silence in the mansion wasn't heavy with threat. It was simply quiet. 3 months later, the skyline of Seoul changed. Where a derelict warehouse once stood, a former hub for the Kwon family's smuggling operations, glass and steel now rose into the sky. The Kwon Medical Foundation was not a front, it was a penance. Brenda walked through the pristine corridors of the VIP cardiology wing, the click of her heels sounding authoritative at home. She wore no uniform now. Dressed in a tailored blazer, she carried a tablet, reviewing patient intake forms. Administrator Ade, a passing surgeon, nodded respectfully. She paused outside Suite 1. Inside, the rhythmic steady beep of a heart monitor was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. Tun sat up in bed, laughing at a joke on the television, his color rich and healthy, the jagged scar on his chest healing perfectly. He was safe. He was whole. "He looks good," a deep voice said from behind her. Brenda turned. Lee Min-pyo stood there, looking healthier than she had ever seen him. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by the glow of a man who slept at night. His eyes were clear, sharp, and warm. "His ejection fraction is up to 60%. Brenda smiled, checking the chart. "He'll be discharged next week." "Good. Because I need my head of operations focused," Lee said, stepping closer. He didn't reach for her hand like a boy. He stood beside her like a partner. "The board is meeting in an hour. We need to approve the budget for the pediatric wing." "I told you we cut the security budget," Brenda countered, her tone firm but teasing. We don't need an army to guard a hospital. Old habits, Lee murmured, a small smile playing on his lips. He looked through the glass at Tund, then back at the woman who had saved them both. You didn't just save him, Brenda. You cauterized the wound in this family. You saved me. I just did my job, she whispered. No, Lee corrected, taking her hand. His grip was strong, steady, and free of tremors. You changed the game. Standing there, watching her brother laugh in the sunlight, Brenda realized she hadn't just paid a debt. She had built a future. The nurse from Ogun State had walked into the lion's den and tamed the beast. Not with force, but with the terrifying, unstoppable power of healing. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share to enjoy more Mafia love stories.